because Ben Shapiro is not in Destiny's weight class whatsoever. And I'm not even comparing their personal lives because there's not a single human on the face of the earth that would want to have Destiny's personal life. His wife just left him, and there's like 15 other things wrong with Destiny that I can't say on YouTube. But I've recorded a video about it. You can go check it out if you want.
Here's Ben Shapiro and Destiny. Ben, you're a conservative. Destiny, you're a liberal. Can you each describe what key values?
It's so funny for that to even be the initial label, because that just slanders all liberals so aggressively. There's a difference between being a classical liberal, like Jordan Peterson is, and this guy representing them, given how wrecked his personal life is. And when I say this is so far below Ben Shapiro's intellectual weight class, you got to understand, Ben Shapiro is almost a billionaire, if not already a billionaire. His unmitigated success with the Daily Wire is absolutely insane. Meanwhile, Destiny's been doing YouTube for 10 years and doesn't even have 1 million subscribers.
Values underpin your philosophy on politics and maybe
And their wives.
life in the
Why is everyone on the left so wrecked these days? They're so blind to the fact that Marxism is destroying them. Dude, if I was by temperament a liberal, and so I was by default meant to be a liberal, I would be so constantly disavowing Marxism that is destroying, like obliterating the leftist position and the leftist ability to interface with reality, to think, to use rationality, logic, etc. It's insane.
You want to go first?
Yeah, so I think that we have a huge country full of a lot of people, a lot of individual talents, capabilities. And I think that the goal of government, broadly speaking, should be to try to ensure that everybody's able to achieve as much as possible. So on a liberal level, that usually means some people might need a little bit of a boost when it comes to things like education. They might need a little bit of a boost.
It's so obvious to see how Ben Shapiro is going to rip him apart. Dude, an extremely sharp mind. I want you guys to understand these guys are not equals. They are not even close to equals, okay? Ben Shapiro is very close to Jordan Peterson level, okay? This guy's wife just left him for a man in a dress. They are not anywhere near equivalent.
When it comes to providing certain necessities like housing or food or clothing. But broadly speaking, I mean, I'm still a liberal, not a communist or a socialist. I don't believe in the, total command economy, total communist takeover of all of the, economy.
Okay, so there you see him distance himself from the Marxist ideology, which of course is important. But I think that if you look at his beliefs, he is still deeply affected by the anti-objective framework sentiment of the radical left that says reality itself is oppressive no matter how it formulates itself. Because you see that when he goes on the Red Pill podcast and denies that men and women are, one such example is when he denies hypergamy. But anyway.
But I think that broadly speaking, the government should kind of like kick in and help people when they need it.
And that government can and should be big.
Not necessarily. I noticed that when liberals talk about government, or especially taxes, it seems
okay, so what he just said actually is no longer a liberal position. That is a thinking person, conservative, middle position. When you say liberal, you are associating yourself with so much unthinking propaganda, so much essentially constructed beliefs that exist to go to war with objective truth, that what he just described is not a liberal position. That might have been a liberal position in 1980. That is not what a liberal position is now. A liberal position now is that there's no such thing as the individual. Responsibility doesn't exist. Men can get pregnant, and equality of outcome is desirable.
Seems like they talk about it for taxes' sake or bigness sake. So people talk about taxes sometimes as like a punishment, like tax the rich. I think taxing the rich is fine insofar as it funds the programs that we want to fund. But Democrats have a really big problem.
The rich is already taxed. So the top 1% pays 42% of all taxes.
But Democrats have a really big problem demonizing success or wealth, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't think it's a bad thing to be wealthy, to be a billionaire or whatever, as long as we're funding what we need to fund.
Ben, what do you think it means to be a conservative? What's the philosophy that underlies your political view?
So first of all, I'm glad that Destiny, you're already coming out as a Republican. That's exciting.
Yeah, exactly. What he described is not liberal at all. That is not a liberal position.
We hold a lot in common in terms of the basic idea that people ought to have as much opportunity as possible. And also insofar as the government should do the minimum amount necessary to interfere in people's lives in order to pursue certain functions, particularly at the local level. So a lot of governmental discussions on a pragmatic level end up being discussions about where government ought to be involved, but also at what level government ought to be involved. The idea, in my view, that all human beings have equal value before the law I'm a religious person, so I'd say equal value before God, but I think that's also sort of a key tenet of Western civilization, being non-religious or religious, that every individual has equivalent value in sort of cosmic terms. But that does not necessarily mean that every person is equally equipped to do everything equally well. And so it is not the job of government to rectify every imbalance of life. The quest for cosmic justice, as Thomas Sowell suggests, is something that government is generally incapable of doing, and more often than not botches and makes things worse.
Trump versus Biden. Between the two of them, who was in their first term the better president? And
Dude, Trump's presidency was a monumental success in every regard, but in order to acknowledge that or even analyze that coherently, you have to first accept that an objective truth exists, that you can understand it, and that reality is comprehensible using logic and reason. Those things are intolerable to at least 25% of leftists that are possessed by the postmodernist ideology stating there is no such thing as objective truth. Also, at the beginning of Joe Biden's presidency, we had the famous Hitler speech that will go down, that will be remembered literally for hundreds of years, that CNN broadcasted, where they literally had red lights going behind Biden screaming at the camera. Dude, that was crazy.
thus, who should win if the two of them are, in fact, our choices, should win a second term
And make no mistake about it, Trump will be the choice. The question is, who will the left find to run against him? Because Biden's brain is a bowl of soup.
in 2024. Ben?
And by the way, guys, I'm not trying to ad hominem attack Biden. I'm actually describing the state of dementia that he exists in. By the way, I want to be very clear.
Sure. So in terms of actual job performance, you have to separate it into a few categories. In terms of actual performance in foreign policy, I think Trump's foreign policy record is significantly better than Biden's, the world being on fire right now being a fairly good example of that. And we can get into each aspect of the world being on fire and where the incentive structures came from and how all of that happened in a moment. When it comes to the economy, I think that Trump's economic record was better than Biden's.
Remember what I said about the calculating analysis of Destiny's mind? He knows that Ben Shapiro can, I'll just say it, he knows Ben Shapiro can obliterate him on any topic that they debate. And so he's going to choose what he says very carefully. Watch.
Doesn't mean he didn't overspend. He did. He wildly overspent. But he also had a very solid record of job creation. A huge percentage of the gains in the economy went to people on the lower end of the economic spectrum. Actually, the gross income to the average American was about $6,000 during his term. The unemployment rates were very, very low before COVID.
Remember, we still have foreign policy and Israel-Palestine to get to, and then wokeism.
Yeah, I think that you almost have to separate the Trump administration.
Subscribe to the channel, guys. If you're not subscribed, what the hell are you even doing right now, bro? Subscribe. We have to Aikido these worthless, degenerate Marxists.
In terms of foreign policy, in terms of domestic policy, I think that Trump was significantly better than Biden has been. And that's on the upside for Trump. On the downside for Biden, obviously you're talking 40-year highs in inflation. You're talking about savings being eaten away. You're talking about everything being 20 to 30% more expensive. You're talking about
try spending under $100 at any grocery store in America and see how far it gets you, bro.
Massive increases to the deficit, even at a rate that was unknown under Trump. The deficit under Trump raised by about a little under $1 trillion every year up until 2020. Again, 2020 was COVID year, so everybody decided that we're going to fire hose money at things. But then Joe Biden continued to fire hose money at things in 21, 22, and 23. That obviously is, in my opinion, bad economic policy. And
the national debt is going to exceed in interest payments what we spend on defense.
Then you get to the rhetoric and you get to the stuff that Donald Trump says. And as I've said before, my view is that on Donald Trump's epitaph, on his gravestone, it will say Donald Trump. He said a lot of shit. I think that Donald Trump does say a lot of things. I think that that is basically baked into the cake, which is why everyone who's bewildered by the polls is ignoring human nature, which is at the beginning, when you see something very shocking, it's very shocking. And then if you see it over and over and over and over for years on end, it is no longer shocking. It is just part of the background noise like tinnitus. Do I like a lot of Donald Trump's rhetoric? No, and I never have. Do I think that that is dispositive as to his presidency? No, I do not. When it comes to Biden, again, I think he's underperforming economically. I think that his foreign policy has been really a problem. Even the things I think he's done right are, I think, band-aids for things that he created by doing wrong.
Dude, the foreign policy under Biden is not even foreign policy. It's like deliberately, it's like he's operating as if America's an enemy. It's insane.
And when it comes to his own rhetoric, you can argue that it's grading on a curve because Trump was coming in with such wild rhetoric that just a maintenance of that wild rhetoric doesn't really change, again, the baseline.
This is one of the areas where we get into this. I don't understand if there's like brain breaking happening or what's going on. I don't know what world we can ever live in where we say that Trump is less divisive for the country than Biden. I think it is so patently.
What an unthinking leftist position that is, dude. Divisiveness is not the measurement that we must use. Feelings are not the measurement we must use. The question is who is right and who is literally an enemy of truth, morality, and all objective mechanisms. Do you think the civilization we have is an accident? Do you think that that what we've been able to build here in America is an accident and the result of feelings or the result of brilliant ideas and coherence? Biden is the antithesis, as he is possessed by the woke mind virus, by the various stooges propping him up in his dementia-ridden state, of that woke mind virus. The question is who can take our country in the right direction. This is exactly what we see, that postmodernist belief of the right direction doesn't exist, it's all subjective. Incorrect, totally wrong.
So divisive. Like, not only does Trump make an enemy out of every person in the opposition party, he makes an enemy out of his own party and every single person around him.
No,
like, we all
okay. He might have somewhat of a point when he says Trump makes an enemy out of everyone around him. I think that he could be less hostile to people like Vivek and DeSantis when he's leading them by 45 points in the polls, probably more like 50 points. But it's not true to say that he goes out of his way to make enemies of leftists. Leftists have printed in the headlines for 8 years in a row, Trump is racist. Who is antagonizing who? Who's going after who? It's not even close. There is an entire media apparatus dedicated to propaganda, to demonize in Marxist fashion any person that doesn't adhere to their identity politics group.
all watched him bully, Jeff Sessions. We all watched him bully his own party on Twitter. We all watched like all of these people walk away from him. Even recently, I think the Secretary of Defense Esper and John Kelly, the Chief of Staff, were saying, I think Trump is a threat to democracy. You've got all of his prior people that were around him, some of his close.
Okay. See, that's an emotional leftist leap right there. He doesn't get along with people. He's a threat to democracy. Wait a second. Where did you just connect those two things? He doesn't get along with some people. He's a threat to democracy. Oh, we're going to uphold democracy and remove him from the ballot. It's just two leaps for these leftists. They don't even realize what they're doing.
Allies, you've got Bill Barr that won't co-sign a single thing that he says. You've got all these people.
Why does it matter if an individual person doesn't co-sign what people say? You could find a human that is opposed to any other human in the world that would not co-sign what someone says.
He used to work with that all say Trump is a horrible, evil person. He is ineffective as a leader. He doesn't accomplish anything, and he didn't. To say that Biden has failed at bipartisanship when we've gotten the CHIPS Act, we've gotten the
Ben Shapiro is realizing, okay, so this guy I'm debating right now doesn't care about reality because he makes these platitudes that are so easy to debunk. It is an admission instantly that he is not engaging in reality in the presuppositional axis. When you say something that is blatantly wrong and so easily debunked, especially in front of someone that can so easily do it, you are acknowledging that you do not care about truth.
IRA, we've gotten the ARP, we've gotten the bipartisan infrastructure bill.
This is a larger issue with leftists, is that they put feelings, emotions, and ideology such as victimhood status and counterfeit virtue above coherence and objective truth, as well as all objective frameworks which apply to morality.
We've got like all this major legislation that is working in this historically divided Congress, as opposed to Trump that got us tax cuts and deficit spending. See how on any metric he is ever succeeding in the divisive category.
Again, this argument of him being divisive is not an argument for he should not be president. The argument instead should be who is right and who is wrong.
In terms of the economy, I do think it's funny that Republicans are very keen to say that, like, well, we can't really grade Trump, post-COVID, because obviously COVID messed everything up, which is fair. But pre-COVID, what did Trump do? Yeah, he did deficit spending.
Are you kidding me? Oh my God. Okay, like I already said, he acknowledged he's not interested in reality by a question like that. There's endless answers, right?
He presided over historic low interest rates and an economy that was already like blazing past the final.
The economy was so insanely good they have to come up with an excuse for it. They have to explain, oh, the economy was so good because of Obama's policies, right? Yeah, that's it. 4 years earlier, yeah.
Years of Obama. We were posting all-time highs in all the stock markets.
You can't make this up. You literally can't make this up. The economy was so good under Trump, they can't cope with it. They have to make shit up.
2013 than they were under Trump. But it sucks that for Trump, we can say, well, we can't really hold him accountable for 2020. That was COVID. Well, all we have for Biden is post-COVID. We don't have any pre-COVID Biden.
No, wrong. We have Ukraine. We have the horrible, disgusting, humiliating withdrawal from the Middle East. We have unmitigated spending in the trillions that did nothing but increase inflation. Oh my gosh,
economy. And it was the same thing for Obama too, coming in right after the housing collapse as well. And it sucks that Republicans are able to walk out of office, having burned the entire American society to the ground.
It's really insane that he would say something like that, given the fact that we are about to go into a recession in 2024, that they have wrecked the economy so egregiously that there's literally expected to be such a massive correction that will put rich people into poverty. That's what's coming, guys.
Can you comment on the foreign policy?
On the foreign policy,
Dude, Lex knows what's up. He's like, can you comment on the foreign policy? And meanwhile, there's that image playing of people falling off the airplane in the Middle East. You can't make it up, bro. These leftists have an aversion to reality, and we can laugh at it, we can make fun of them, but you have to understand it's deliberate. And when you realize that that's the case, that it's deliberate, it's not so funny anymore. You're like, wait a second, they actually don't like America. And I'm not talking about liberals that, were proper liberals in the 1980s saying things like, we should give people a chance. I'm talking about people that say men can get pregnant.
I'm going to be honest. I am very liberal. I'm very not progressive. I'll probably come off as more hawkish than others because I'm not a big fan of this. Which also, if Ben agrees, I think people like Trump are going to be the most dovish isolationist people ever. They don't want to do anything internationally. They just want to,
When he says isolationist, you have to understand that as a low resolution statement, because when you put your country first, it's not accurate or high resolution to describe your policy as isolationist. It's America first. Now, is he right when he says that America cares more about Colorado than he does about France? Yes, but he should.
Protect America, be at home, protect our economy, don't do anything internationally, which is why he was constantly undermining NATO and constantly, attacking all of the European Union.
NATO undermined NATO.
I think that being said, I think that Biden has done a phenomenal job when it comes to foreign policy. I think that the coalition building was such a job. I think that being said, I think that Biden has done a phenomenal job when it comes to foreign policy. I think that.
Okay. So let's get to Ben Shapiro wrecking him over that statement. The statement, I think Biden has done a good job with foreign policy compared to the images of people falling off of airplanes, is such a perfect encapsulation of the leftist illusion.
The Afghanistan plot was so disastrous was because of the Doha Accords, where Donald Trump headed talks that didn't even...
Oh, right. It was Trump's fault that people were falling off airplanes. He had to get there. They always do that. It's so ridiculous. Their brains are ravaged by the resentment of Marxism. Even these people that claim to be liberals and not progressives, they're destroyed. Marxism knows no bounds. The reason for that is because the molecular composition of their fuel, their ideological fuel, is resentment. It knows no bounds.
Include the Afghanistan army. These were disasters. Like when Biden took office, we had 2,500 troops left in Afghanistan. What was the options even afforded to?
What do you mean by that? Okay, yeah, okay. So that's such an insanely low IQ statement that it's not even worth dealing with, right?
Well, there's a lot. So, I want to ask a few questions on each one of these.
Yeah, sure.
So let's talk about...
He's nervous, and he knows that he's not a match for Shapiro, so he's really tuning up right now. If you guys play StarCraft, we're looking at a player with 5,000 MMR about to try to play a map versus a guy that's 6.5k MMR. That's what we're looking at right here. Jordan Peterson being like 6.9k, 7k MMR. 7.2k in his prime.
Divisiveness for a second. So there's no one who can make the case that Donald Trump is not divisive.
Yeah.
Of course, he's incredibly divisive. It's a given. Do you treat Biden's rhetoric with the same level of seriousness that you treat Trump's rhetoric? Or I should probably put that the other way around. Should we treat Trump's rhetoric with the same level of seriousness as Joe Biden or, say, Barack Obama's rhetoric? I'm
going to try to be concise when I say these. Broadly speaking, especially in studying Israel, Palestine, and Ukraine, Russia, I try not to take politicians at their word because sometimes they just say stuff to say stuff. I understand that. But broadly speaking, I'm going to look at the rhetoric and the actions, and I am going to grade them the same. So yes, I would hold Biden and Trump to the same standard.
Right. So my feeling is, and this is one area...
He's nervous right now, and I'm not just trying to be like one of these sensational people that just is analyzing on that level, but I am saying it because it's true, and I want you to notice and acknowledge that Destiny is nervous. Now, Destiny is an intelligent person. I'm not trying to take anything away from him. I'm just simply analyzing the situation.
Or for clarification, we're going to have a division, is that I, of course, don't treat Trump's rhetoric in the same way that I treat Biden's or Obama's. He's utterly uncalibrated, and he says whatever he wants to at any given time, and it doesn't even match up with his policy very often. A person who I think in calibrated ways says things that are divisive, and a person who in uncalibrated ways says things that are divisive. And so the evidence that Joe Biden is divisive is every poll taken since essentially August of 2021. He is, by all available metrics, incredibly divisive. A huge percentage of Americans are deeply unhappy, not only with his performance, but don't believe he's a uniter. That's just the reality. And that may just be a reflection. I mean, honestly, we may be putting too much on Trump or Biden personally. It may just be that the American people themselves are rhetorically divided because of social media, and social media can, in fact, be a cesspool. And all
one
that.
thing that I would ask you about that, though,
Sure.
is I agree, especially when you look at the favorability. But sometimes when I look at these polls, when you start to disaggregate them by party, I wonder if it's actually, is Biden historically divisive, or I'm trying to think of a really polite way to say this. The people that like Trump worship Trump. I don't know. Like one of the most prescient things that Trump could have probably ever said was that I could kill someone on Fifth Street and nobody would hold me accountable. So is it really that Biden is historically divisive, or is it that every single Trump supporter will always say that Trump is great and always say that Biden is bad?
Leftists accuse their opposition of what they, in fact, are guilty of. Leftists abide in such a strict identitarian policy that to even deviate against their ideology invalidates your virtue and social status. In fact, according to leftists, your virtue and merit, insofar they even think a merit exists, is defined by how fervently you adhere to the identity categories and the ensuing counterfeit virtue that would come from those identity categories, such as race, sexual identity, gender, sexual proclivity. The list goes on and on. We all know that unthinking leftist drones assign your very virtue and status as a result of your gender and skin color, to the point where they think pilots of airliners should be selected for their skin color.
Republicans always find the Democratic president divisive. The question is where the rest of the country is. And right now, there are a lot of Democrats who either don't agree with Biden or find him divisive. There are a lot of independents who
I think
find him.
that has not always been true. People used to not always be deeply offended by the person who is president. The issue began when the Marxist ideology insisted that leftists put group identity over an individual identity.
So there's that. I think that's mostly a state and local
But they
issue.
were in favor of mass spending for tax cuts?
That's not a spending. I mean,
Effectively it is, right? Like,
effectively, it's not.
well, if you're cutting tax receipts, but you're not changing the level of spending, like Biden did with the IRA.
I mean, again, we have a fundamental philosophical difference here. I think that when the government takes my money, that is not the government somehow being more fiscally responsible. And when the government allows me to keep my money, I don't see that as the government spending. I see that as my money, and the government is taking less of it.
That's great, but at the end of the day, the government is still going to be in a deficit spending, and they're going to have to borrow money from the Treasury.
Right, we have a spending problem. In other words, not a receipts problem, is the case that I'm making. The problem with Donald Trump is not that he lowered taxes. The United States has one of the most progressive tax systems on the planet.
Destiny is used to making incoherent platitudes that are not adequately challenged, and Vin Shapiro just did it with a fraction of his ability.
And in fact, class to death. I mean, the reality is that the top 20% of the American population pays literally all net taxes in the United States after state benefits and all of this.
Sure.
So if you actually wanted to have the kind of social welfare state that many liberals seem to want to have, like Northern Europe, for example, you'd actually have to tax.
When you tell a leftist that, they may actually say that's not true and admit they don't care about reality. I want to make that clear. By the way, it's getting dim in here. Let me turn on the light real quick. There are leftists that would deny objective truth just because it inconveniences their incoherent worldview.
The problem is they keep spending, not that they are allowing me to keep the money that I earned and they did not earn. But
okay, so then just to understand, so if somebody just did massive reductions in tax receipts, so tax cut after tax cut after tax cut, but they didn't change spending at all, you wouldn't consider that like an increase in deficit spending or out of control spending. You would just say they're just tax cuts?
No, the opposite. I would consider it a wild. I would consider it a wild overspending.
Okay.
Meaning
so then
that,
was it under Trump then when he did the tax?
I mean, the deficit spending, by the way, under Biden is way worse than it was under.
Of course, but we're in post-COVID, right?
COVID ended effectively. I mean, you live in Florida. COVID effectively ended in the state of Florida by the middle of 2021.
Yeah,
I mean, even if you're a
like
vaccine fan, by like April, May of 2021, there was wide availability of vaccines, whether or not you like the vaccines.
Yeah.
And at that point, we were done.
I agree, but like we're in a post, like how many trillions of dollars have been dumped in worldwide that are like leading to inflation, right? The inflation is like a worldwide issue right now because of the economy shutting down for a year or two. It's not like those effects are gone in 1 year, right? COVID might be gone, but the after effects of all the stimulus spending and the unemployment and everything else.
The definition of inflation is too much money chasing too few goods. So pouring more money on top of that makes for more inflation. That's what it does.
Sure, I agree. But like there's also the definition of when do you deficit spend is when economies are headed for recessions, right? Rather than when economies are doing really well, like they were under Trump and he was deficit spending, whereas Biden can at least make the argument that I ought to be deficit spending because the economy is headed for potential recession. Right?
So here's the thing.
He just acknowledged that the economy is heading for a recession under Biden. And earlier he didn't acknowledge that. Complete intellectual unseriousness.
on the foreign policy stuff. So the questions that I have with regard to Biden on foreign policy, very, very simple question. Do you think that the situation in the Middle East is better now than it was under Donald Trump?
It's essentially like asking a leftist, is the earth flat or not? And then if they answer it is flat, then you know that they're not interested in ideas.
Probably, that's a hard one. The factors
Why?
that I'm making right now are like, obviously you've got the Israel-Palestinian war that's going on right now, which is kind of bad, but like broadly speaking,
You can't make this shit up. Oh no, dude! Flash the image of people falling out of the airplane as it was taking off. Oh no, leftists can't think, bro.
I'm not sure how much that affects the Middle East as much as like the collapse of Syria. 2013 Syrian civil war sent millions of immigrants
2013, 2013.
throughout all of Europe, and
Which was under
which was under Obama and continued
Right.
under Trump. Trump didn't do
Oh no, they can't use numbers either.
anything to alleviate any of the Syrian civil war. In terms,
Why
like,
did Syria end up as a preserve of Russia again?
how did Syria end up as a preserve of Russia?
Yes. Why did it end up
See, okay, yeah. Watch Ben Shapiro dismantle this guy.
being essentially a clan?
Destiny's used to taking such enormous risks in terms of intellectual statements that are not substantiated and he never gets called on it. Ben Shapiro is just going to do it easily.
And state of Russia?
I know that Putin enjoys access to the ports down there. I don't know. You tell me.
I mean, the reason is because Barack Obama suggested that there was a red line that would be drawn in the face of chemical weapons use. Bashar Assad then used chemical weapons in Syria,
You see the depth of knowledge here? Yeah.
and Barack Obama was unwilling to then essentially create consequences for Syria in the form of
School's in session, Destiny.
any sort of Western strike. And so instead, he outsourced it to Russia. This is 2013,
Next
2014.
class is how not to lose your wife to a man in a dress.
Sure.
Right,
Do you
so
think
the-
there might have been some hesitancy after like seeing how Libya ended up that maybe us like intervening?
Who was
hardcore-
president during Libya?
Well,
Yeah. I mean, like, so the,
sure, but what does that have to do with anything? Though? I'm just
I mean,
saying
no,
that, like there might have been like a mistake learned.
the point that I'm making
like,
is that actually the Middle East,
The point that he's making is very, very obvious. Leftist presidents fail in terms of foreign policy. 0 wars under Trump.
I mean, just historically speaking, was historically good under Donald Trump. I mean, it's very difficult to make the case that either before or after Trump were better than during Donald Trump.
Was
Like,
it
this
good?
is
I
an
mean,
area of
the
yes.
Syrian. I don't think that Trump contributed to the Syrian situation in improving much. I think
I mean,
that
he
caused
wrecked
a lot
ISIS.
of.
He did
What?
wreck ISIS, which was in the.
I mean, ISIS had been getting
ISIS.
wrecked by the Kurds in Iraq, by every single person, by Assad's
There's
army,
why-
by Putin, by Turkey. Literally everybody was fighting against ISIS at that point.
There's a spike in violence, and then
Mm-hmm.
the Trump. I mean, you get credit for when you're president, presumably. I mean, things got better with ISIS under Trump.
I mean, yeah, they did. I mean,
Things got worse
were-
with ISIS under Obama.
for sure.
He called them the
Something
JV
that-
squad.
Sure.
And then they became not the JV squad.
Yeah, but the biggest criticism I have for like Middle Eastern policy is I think the Doha Accords were a disaster, and I think that's like one of the biggest blemishes that we have right now. I would also argue that moving the
He's
embassy.
never heard of the Doha Accords until 6 hours before this debate when he Googled something on Wikipedia. Guys, this guy is a complete fraud. He is totally out of his depth, and this is a joke.
To Jerusalem was also kind of silly, and arguably contributed to some of the conflict we see right now
No,
between
it's
Israel
actually,
and
so I'll
Palestine.
argue precisely the opposite,
ahead.
especially given the fact that after the movement of the embassy to Jerusalem, the Abraham Accords continued to sign and actually expand. And that if Donald Trump had been elected, I have no doubt in my mind that Saudi Arabia would now be a part of the Abraham Accords. In fact, that was basically pre-negotiated.